Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I guess, well, depending on where you are in the world, it is afternoon on my time. I do have a slide. I do have a slide. Sorry. I just need to start this recording process. Sorry, MJ has this up for us. So here is our opening slide for the panel. So hello again, everyone. I am Nadia Brown, and I am the chair of this panel, Black Women's Representation in U.S. Institutional Politics. Our panelists today are Sydney Carr, Jatia Wrighten, Elizabeth Walker, and I think that's Alexis. No, Elizabeth Walker and Nadia Brown. Alexis, you're also on the panel, but I'm sorry, I didn't see this here. Alexis, Harris, and Adrienne Scott. Adrienne, are you here? Okay. So perhaps we'll go in this order with Alexis, then Sydney, then Jatia. Is Elizabeth here? Okay. And then MJ and I can close this out. Is that good? So each panelist has about 10 minutes, and I will keep that. I'll keep the time. And yes, please transfer the host responsibilities to me now. Okay, so I'll start first. Again, I'll start keeping time. So the order is Alexis, Sydney, Jatia, and MJ. Sounds like a plan? All right, I'll stop sharing. And Alexis, if you'd like to start, please do.
Okay, absolutely. I will start sharing. Let's do this. Okay, and I'm hoping everyone can see my slides. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. And I'm going to minimize our faces here. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexis Harris. I'm a doctoral candidate in the Department of Political Science at Clark Atlanta University. And I'm super happy to be here today to share my research titled First Black Woman in the United States Senate, a Constructivist Analysis of Political Socialization. Here are a few things we'll discuss today. I know we're a little pressed for time, but I will keep things short and sweet. We're going to start off with my introduction, and I'll share the statement of the problem as well as the significance of the research. And then we'll move into the literature review, and then I'll discuss my theoretical framework a bit, which consists of womanism, intersectionality, and constructivism, most importantly. And then we'll end with a little discussion on my methodology. So I'm really excited to be here today. Now, typically, the United States Senate is studied from a functional perspective. That is to say, how does it operate within the broader context of American government, within the three branches of government, or more specifically within the bicameral legislature? It's not really studied from a structural or cultural perspective, but using constructivism as a form of analysis enables us to do just that. So when we look at the Senate in terms of representation, that is who is going into the body, or legislation, that is what is coming out of the institution, we're able to see that historically the Senate is an institution rooted in racism, sexism, and classism. The picture that you see here on the left of the screen is the first official Senate photo taken in 1963. And I can't necessarily zoom in here on the slide, but trust me when I say it was and still is a white male dominated institution. And then we fast forward to 30 years later, and we get to the Year of the Woman. Now, the Year of the Woman is significant when we talk about the Senate, because this is where we saw a wave of women candidates winning their elections into the institution. And they sort of made this vow to shake things up a little bit. So I want I want you all to get excited with me about this being a big deal, that more women were being elected into the institution. But if anything looks concerning about this photo, if you're like me, the biggest concern is that there are a bunch of white women as opposed to a diverse mix of women. So we see that there's only one Black woman that was ushered into the Senate during this time with this wave of white women. So while the Senate was being transformed as far as gender goes, it wasn't really being diversified racially. And this picture goes to show as a friendly little reminder that it wasn't until 1993 that women were permitted to wear pants on the floor of the Senate chambers. So the Senate as an institution had a lot of work to do, even with this major stride in the number of women candidates entering the institution. One of the biggest problems identified in the research is what I just said, that there are no Black women in the institution right now. So currently, there are no Black women serving in the United States Senate. Out of 1,994 US senators, there have only been 2 Black women to serve in the body within the history or throughout the history of the United States. The first one that you see here on the left of the screen is Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, she was the most recent woman to win an election to the United States Senate, most recent Black woman to win an election to the United States Senate. And over on the right side of the screen, you see Senator Carol Moseley Braun, and she was the first woman elected to the United States Senate during that year of the woman timeframe. So the biggest problem identified in this research is that there have only been 2 Black women throughout the history of the United States Senate to serve in that body. And currently, there are no Black women in the institution. So my research focuses primarily on Senator Carol Moseley Braun as opposed to Vice President Harris. So we're looking at the first Black woman to serve in this institution. And this slide is a quote from Senator Moseley Braun because she offered a really powerful critique of the institution before being elected to the Senate. And the quote that she said here is, "People had seen the Senate in action and didn't like what they saw. The Senate had exposed itself and demystified itself." Now, what she was referring to was the Anita Hill hearings against Supreme Court Justice nominee at the time, Clarence Thomas. And Moseley Braun was saying, hey, okay, from my perspective as a Black woman, I'm looking at these hearings. The Senate Judiciary Committee isn't some lofty body of the world's greatest thinkers. What we're seeing is a bunch of white men making terrible speeches and decisions about how this Black woman who is seeking justice is being treated within the institution. So taking that into consideration, this aspect of the Senate being demystified and wanting to expose the Senate, that really informed my approach to the research and to this, this dissertation work. So I figured if Moseley Braun had a really powerful critique of the institution before entering the body, I wanted to know how deep that critique went and what else she had to say once she was elected to the institution. This research is an intrinsic phenomenological case study of Senator Moseley Braun's term in office, her full 6-year term, and it explores how Senate socialization impacted Moseley Braun's political identity as well as her internal political efficacy. The research is significant because the Center for American Women in Politics predicts a record-breaking number of Black women Senate candidates during this 2022 election cycle. And we know that Black women, when they're rooted in a particular racial, social, and political consciousness, they have really unique standpoints. And this research contributes to a demystification of the Senate, which allows for more theories regarding institutional malleability to be formed and hypothesized and theorized. The research is also significant because it provides insight regarding how and why institutions could be and should be amenable to the intersectional nuances embedded in the identity politics of its leaders. So the primary research question is, how did Senate socialization impact Moseley Braun's identity politics as well as her internal political efficacy? The
3
secondary.
minutes. I'm sorry, Alexis, 3
Oh,
minutes.
no problem. Thank you so much. And the secondary research question is, what do her descriptive accounts of Senate culture tell us about the nature of power relations in the institution? And here's a quick overview of my literature review. I'll start off with a broad discussion of women's struggles for representation in electoral politics before moving on to Black women's intersectional resistance to political oppression. And then the research examines Black political behavior, more specifically Black women in legislative bodies, before moving to a historicized discussion of Senate traditions and political socialization within the context of American institutions more broadly. And this is just a quote that leads into my theoretical framework, where Moseley Braun is talking about her impact as a woman, and it leads us into womanism as the foundation of the theoretical framework. Womanism is important because it rejects the essentialization of women, so it allows us to view Moseley Braun's experiences within the context of her complexities as a Black woman. Intersectionality allows us to interrogate the space that she existed within as a Black, both as a Black person and a woman. And it allows us to ask, what did she experience for being both at the same time, both Black and a woman at the same time? Constructivism tells us that institutions are not fixed. They're worthy of critique and criticism, and constructivism allows space for us to critique institutions a bit and say, hey, meanings matter. Institutions are only as rigid as the folks within them. Regarding research methods, this is a case study using a qualitative content analysis of the senator's archived senatorial collection, which is housed at the Chicago History Museum. It also utilizes a firsthand interview with the senator, as well as an analysis of her remarks in the congressional record. And in closing, I wanted to share a couple of images from my work in the field. I visited the Chicago History Museum last year and got to go through her archives a bit. They pulled a bunch of her records for me, so I had a great time going through those. This middle photo you see here is a photograph of one of the archive documents from, I believe, 1996, maybe 94 or 96, but just to show you all that she's shaking up the Senate a little bit, and the archives are in very good condition. And the picture to the right of your screen is a photo of myself and Senator Moseley Braun at her home in Chicago, and that's where I conducted the interview and got to explore her experiences and ask her questions about her time in the institution and how those experiences shaped her identity politics as well as her internal political efficacy. And I will stop there. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Alexis. You were starting us off on the right foot. You ended on time, exactly. Something that no academic ever does. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to move on to Sydney Carr, and I want to just make a note that Elizabeth has joined us, so we'll add Elizabeth to the end of the presentation schedule. And because you most likely can't see me when you're sharing your slides, I'll have to interrupt like I did with Alexis and just kind of yell out the time. So sorry in advance for that. All right, I'll turn this over to Sydney. Your time starts now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. Sorry, I'm just blanking on where the the presentation
slideshow at the very top to your right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that happens only when
Sorry.
you're
I'm like, where is it? Okay, so thank you, everyone. So my name is Sydney. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan, and I'll be presenting some of the work from my dissertation today. So this is one of the chapters of my dissertation titled Public Opinion Toward Black Female Political Elites. So just to go over the overview of what I'll be doing today, I'm going to dive into some background and introduction for the project, theory building, my hypotheses, data, methods, preliminary results, and discussion and future direction for the project. So just some background. The project, the larger dissertation project, is really a culmination of a study of public opinion surrounding Black women in the context of news media and political communication. But just to sort of set this project in sort of a, broader background here. So I just have some screenshots, right? Basically taken from news articles that were written surrounding prominent Black women political elites, in sort of grounding this project in the ways that Black women seemingly receive heightened level of criticism in the context of the news, in the context of public opinion, right? I'm sure you all remember when Michelle Obama took her first official photo as First Lady, and that was back in 2009, that there was this uproar over her bare arms. I have this photo in a slide here, right? We also see Maxine Waters, sort of, continually getting characterized as this angry Black woman, right? We also saw a lot of criticism that Kamala Harris faced, particularly last year, right? So this is just sort of some background opening of this project, thinking about sort of the disproportionate criticism that Black women receive, right? And so this project is very important for several reasons, but one of the most important reasons that we're seeing Black women continually come onto this, the political landscape. We're seeing them change the American political landscape in ways that we haven't really seen before, right? But it's still important that we sort of analyze their experiences in the context of public opinion. So just going into some of the theory, right? So this particular chapter of the dissertation focuses on the extent to which Black women receive a heightened level of negative criticism in the context of American public opinion. So I really look towards the intersectionality framework, right, famously coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, which would predict that Black female political elites will encounter disadvantages relative to their counterpart groups based upon their dual race gender identity, right? This idea of the double disadvantage framework, which I'm sure many of us on the panel today are very familiar with, right? And so Black women, in the political limelight may face a set of systemic disadvantages when compared to their counterpart groups. And I know Nadia has done tons and tons of extensive work on this, this topic, right? As well as the other authors here. And so, Black political figures and women political figures, respectively, do face obstacles in public opinion that their white and male counterparts do not, right? So the question here is, what does this mean for Black women empirically, right? Are there sort of systemic, biases that Black women in particular face relative to their counterpart groups? So going more into this theory building here, so it's plausible that Black women will face heightened negative evaluations in the context of a public opinion under certain circumstances, right? So I hypothesize, and based on my extensive reading of the literature and my theoretical framework, I really look toward racial resentment and modern sexism, right? The reason being, racial resentment alone has very important implications for public evaluations of Black political candidates. And also on the other end of that, modern sexism scores also significantly impact evaluations of Black female political figures. So one of the main sort of hypotheses of this chapter of the dissertation is that the combination, right? So racial resentment times modern sexism, right? That respondents who score high on both of these scales will be uniquely critical of Black female political figures. So the reason why I really drawn on these circumstances is to think about, what circumstances would it be so that Black women in particular face a unique level of systemic bias in the context of American public opinion that their counterparts do not. And I also talk about in the dissertation party ID and things like that. But in this particular presentation, I'm focusing on racial resentment times modern sexism. So the research question, as I just mentioned, do Black female political elites encounter a heightened level of public opinion bias when compared to their counterparts of other race gender groups? I'm mainly just focusing on white women, white men, and Black men. So I have a set of hypotheses. Again, there are a larger set, but I'm just focusing on a small part for this presentation today, just for the purposes of time, right? So I think that respondents who score high on both racial resentment and modern sexism will be generally less supportive of Black female political elites. Respondents who score high on both racial resentment and modern sexism will be more likely to have negative attitudes surrounding the work ethic and leadership capabilities of Black female political elites. And respondents who score high on both racial resentment and modern sexism will be less likely to associate Black female political elites with good qualities that are necessary for success in the political arena. So, data and methods. So I do a couple of things here in this particular study. So the first is, okay, perfect. The first is just a 1,000 respondent survey fielded with Cloud Research. Respondents are exposed to a series of 12 current political figures. They include Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Maxine Waters, Marcia Fudge, Jim Hines, Carolyn Maloney, 12 political figures. There are 3 Black women, 3 Black men, 3 white men, 3 white women. And they're asked to assess their characteristics, particularly the extent to which they believe they're strong leaders, whether they care about people like me, or if they're angry, aggressive. The second part, the second study, is an experiment fielded with Nadia, where respondents are exposed to information surrounding a series of hypothetical political figures and asked to assess their traits. So for the purposes of time today, I'm only showing mean values. So this is just a general basic table. Mean values, respondent attitudes toward political figures according to race, gender, group. So I put all the Black women, Black men, and white women into an index. And these are the mean values respondents overall, the sense in which they believe they're strong leaders, care about people like them, or they're angry, aggressive. I'm just gonna try to zoom through this. I don't wanna go over time. But as you can see, Black women do get the higher scores in terms of angry/aggressive. So higher values on this table mean that they believe that the particular political figure, or that group rather, is extremely likely to have that characteristic. So this table, the numbers are largely the same. And the second one, these are for people who score high on modern sexism and high on racial resentment, respondent attitudes toward political figures according to race, gender, group. Again, you see that Black women do score higher in terms of the angry/aggressive characteristic, and they get the lowest scores for thinking that they are strong leaders. So just quickly, this is my last slide here, thinking about the discussion and future direction of the project. Some of the preliminary evidence, of course, I couldn't show all of the OLS regressions and things like that in today's presentation, point toward evidence that Black women may face a systemic bias in the context of public opinion, particularly within this angry/aggressive characteristic that I'm going to be looking more and more to, because I think there's definitely something there. The results definitely point toward gender penalties for women political figures writ large. The second part of this project, like I said, I'll be doing an experiment because I really want to determine the causal impact between these racial resentment and modern sexism attitudes and respondent evaluations regarding hypothetical political figures. Yeah, so thank you all so much for listening to my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your thoughts and feedback.
All right, thank you so much, Sydney. Also, another person ended right on time. All right, the next presentation will be from Jatia, and your time starts now.
Oh no, there's so much pressure to end on time now. All right. So can everyone can see that, right? The screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Jatia Wrighten, and I'm an assistant professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. So I'm actually going to take this time to give a little background on this article that I submitted for this conference, because it's really the first time which I find myself in the company of scholars who are already very familiar with the political, social, and economic situation that Black women find themselves in the United States. And so basically, I want to start with the motivation for this research. So as a Black woman academic, as you can imagine, most of us have the experience where we are told that we don't fit. And this is not just particular to our careers. I think, for most of us in this country, as Black women, we find ourselves in situations at a very early age based on our identity where we're facing both racism and sexism. We may not be able to voice that at a very early age, but I'm sure that we could all point to some sort of experience that really we, think back to and say, we experienced some form of racism and sexism as a child, and this has had, a lasting effect on my life. And this is really where this work comes from. This is where I am working from. I created an intersectional theory called the heavy lifters theory. And what it really is suggesting is that Black women actually thrive under duress. That's not the situation that we would like to find ourselves in, but that is the situation in which we do find ourselves. And so with that in mind, this intersectional theory basically tries to explain Black women's experience in the United States. In this article in particular, it's the political experience, but in reality, the heavy lifters theory is an intersectional theory or framework that can be applied to all areas of Black women's lives. And where this really comes from is that in graduate school, we had all of these readings that we were told were foundational. They were really, when you got down to the nuts and bolts of it, it was really white men's political experiences in the United States framed in a scholarly way that basically was either about voting, the Constitution, paying taxes or not paying taxes, land ownership, or exclusion from different venues of our society. And that's Finno, Locke, Putnam, really any one of the framers really fall into that category. So when I came across Michael Dawson's work on Linked Fate, it was a book that was not only considered groundbreaking, but it really identified and solidified the Black experience. And it was something that I related to. It was something that was familiar. It's the reason why, during the DC sniper, right, all I think the Black community, we're like, there's no way that the sniper is a Black man, right? And then he ended up being a Black man, and all of us were like, what? Oh man, because there is this idea that whatever happens to Black people in this country happens to us. And of course, Dawson points to the idea that it's shared oppression, but it's partly shared oppression, and it's partly because we know that white people have a hard time telling us apart, right? So there's all of these real life experiences that Dawson captured in his theory, and the heavy lifters theory is in that same vein, right? It is in this tradition of really trying to capture the experience of Black women in this country. And what I have found is that Black women they carry a burden, right? Their identity is really this heavy lifters identity that is a burden, but it also comes with opportunities that have come from living life in the margins that really forces Black women to be innovative and resilient and work outside of our existing US institutions. And of course, this is none too apparent in the political realm, as Black women are the heavy lifters of our democracy, because as we know, as one of the most marginalized groups in the US, we know what's at stake if the pillars of democracy are not upheld. And this is clear in the rates that Black women achieve elected positions, especially in state legislatures. And so this research really presents a historical context by which to understand and examine the gendered nature of the inscription process of Black women. So specifically, their experience as a marginalized group burdened them with the duty of the heavy lifter, but this resilience and fortitude that has shaped their existence is rarely acknowledged. And this is what the heavy lifter does, or at least attempts to do. It's an intersectional framework that relies on path dependence, linked fate, and an intersectional identity that is really inherited through our ancestors. Right. And what I mean by that is that we understand who we are and how we will be judged in our society based on our ancestors and the teachings that they have really passed down to us. And I think that's very particular to the Black woman experience. And so in my work, I really focus on the unique role that Black women have in the US labor market, and that's really set by the Civil War and Reconstruction. So I argue that these events set the groundwork for economic inequality in the Black community, and then set the expectation that Black women should work outside of the home. This is the sociocultural history that gave rise to Black women's unique role in the Black community and the United States. So one way to apply this intersectional framework is through looking at leadership attainment for Black women state legislatures. And so this is like the the application of an intersectional framework that I do see has, a number of applications, but in this one particular, I'm looking at state legislatures and looking at leadership attainment. So although Black women are one of the most marginalized groups, they have a unique and specific social culture experience that forces them to confront obstacles overwhelmingly based on their identity at a very early age. The heavy lifter theory explains how this intersection, women and Black, develop the talent and skills necessary to succeed in state legislatures. So
3 minutes,
really, 3 minutes. So really this originality comes in looking at how Black women have been able to gain leadership at such high rates in comparison to both white men and Black men. And that's really contrary to expectations, right? So if Black women have to face both sexism and racism while they're elected to positions in state legislatures, one would expect that their ability to obtain leadership would actually be hampered by this. And what I find is that it actually is the exact opposite. And so one way which I examine this is I actually have a panel data set from 2007 to 2014 that has about, I think it's like 37,000 legislators within this time frame. And what I look at is really the intersectionality, so this identity. And I know that there are some pushback on using, just the identity of a legislator to suggest leadership attainability, but this I think is more close to explaining the behavior or political behavior within state legislature. And so I use this identity as really a proxy. And what's really surprising, or at least contrary to what is expected, is that Black women are actually have a higher probability of leadership being Black and both women versus being just Black or being just woman. And so that is really contrary to what is the expectation. And so that's why I really worked backwards in thinking about why is this? And my answer to this is the heavy lifters theory, is that there is a tradition of excellence and success that Black women have had to condition because of their marginalized experience in this country. And then also my
1 minute, 1 minute.
Second hypothesis would be, do Black women attain higher rates of leadership than both Black men and white women? And I found that that's actually the case. So Black women are actually 2.5% more likely to gain leadership positions in comparison to Black men and white women, which is also surprising. As you can imagine, that Black women are facing more obstacles in state legislatures, not only institutionally, but based on their identity. And so this application, the heavy lifters theory, has a large number of applications, but for this project or this research, I am looking specifically at leadership attainability in state legislatures. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you also stayed on time. So yes. All right, so the next presentation is from me. Oh, can you stop sharing your screen? Is from me and MJ Strawbridge on behalf of our team. I'll start first, but I would appreciate if someone else can keep the time. So give us 10 minutes and just yell out when we're close. Since I can't do that since I'm the timekeeper. All right, so our paper today, did you get my message? Black Republican Women's Messaging looks at how Black women candidates, Black candidates, both the partisan and gendered impact on their political messaging. So we take the starting point of the increase of Black women Republicans that ran in the 2020 election cycle, particularly congressional candidates. And then as you see here, Winsome Sears, who is the new Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, we're really calling in Black voters to take seriously the claim that Trump said that Democratic Party hasn't done anything for Blacks. Why are you Republicans? Give us a try. And so we're interested in figuring out, how does gender complicate this message of Black partisanship? As a reminder, 2020 was a notable year for Black women political candidates. There were 98 Democrats running and 32 Republicans. Now, if there were a different news cycle or all the things weren't falling apart during the world in 2020, we anticipated that many more people would have been talking about this rise of Black women Republicans. So we're interested here again in seeing the partisan difference in candidate messaging by gender within Black candidates. We know that candidates' messaging is extremely important for Black women candidates because voters tend to have negative stereotypes of them in their mind. So in order for Black women candidates to get out in advance or to kind of work around their bias, we know that Black women have to communicate in different ways. One of the ways they can do so is through social media, right? And not actually relying on traditional news sources like the newspaper or other interviews to get their message out, but take it to the people themselves on social media. And then next, we're interested, again, in this racialized gendered identity and partisanship. So really marrying what Black male and female Democrats, Black male and female Republicans are saying and how they're saying this. So we know that there have been multiple ideologies that Black Americans have had since the founding of our nation, and we want to dive more fully into this. We know that most of the Democratic allegiance in Black communities are a result of these established norms that try to achieve racial group attainment. But what does this look like for Republicans? And so we have a couple of studies that are instructive but not exhaustive to understand how Black women Republicans try to frame their race and gender. And they do so through very conservative lens that we might anticipate, right? So thinking about motherhood or gender as softening their racial identity. So the motivating factor behind this research, I think, is really well summarized in this quote from a text from Leah Rigor. And she says, one of the reasons that we have such a limited impression of Black Republicans is that our understanding of the slice of the political sphere is dominated by the individual stories of a few notorious yet significant individuals. So what we want to do is really expand out, right? Have a more systematic study of Black Republicans, understand who they are, what their motivations are, and how they're talking to their constituents. And doing so to see if there is any difference between these gendered dynamics. So what we do in this study, we contrast Black Republican women with their gendered and partisan counterparts to better understand how race, gender, and partisanship collectively work and how Black candidates present themselves to voters. I'll turn this over to MJ now.
Oh, there we go. Oh, I don't know why am I on the screen? Never mind. So yeah, what happened to it?
I don't know.
Oh no, it's all good.
Okay.
I can read up for that, it's fine. But yeah, as we already mentioned, we use social media data, and we use social media data for two reasons. The first one is that it's different than looking at campaign websites or press releases, things of that nature. So it's a new way to think about a venue that candidates are using or are conveying who they are to voters. More importantly, it's affordable and widely adopted by all candidates now. And it's accessible to us as researchers, rather than having to parse out transcripts. It's already by unit as Facebook data. And what we did was we scraped the Facebook accounts of every campaign page of non-incumbents for the final month of the campaign for Black Republican and Black Democrats. And as you can see, we have the breakdown of our posts there. And this involved both a quantitative and a qualitative analysis. On the quantitative side, we started with the keyword search to parse through the 4,000 some posts, because that's a lot, and that's a lot of work. But we used the keyword searches, which were influenced both by theoretical interests from previous keyword searches, but then also our own qualitative exploratory analysis of the data to identify certain keywords to then add to those searches there. Once we did the searches, we then verified the results to ensure that all the results matched our interests. That was important for words like race, which obviously takes on different meanings depending on when it's used in a post there. So we checked for that. And that also gave us a chance to also disaggregate the results by racial identity, racial issue, gender identity, gender issue, which became important as we will show in a second here. Next slide.
Oh. We got to hurry up, MJ. We got about 3 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm almost done. So the important thing was we're just showing the frequencies here. This is not an attempt to really say who's talk about these issues more, because we're using a snapshot of 1 month of posts. So it's not reflective of overall trends in Black Republican and Black Democrat issue priorities, but it is reflective of sort of what issues collectively these different groups are prioritizing in this month here. So next slide. And what we see with racial identity posts in particular is that Black men and women Democrats, they talked about race in a way where they sort of talked about how their own experiences being a Black man or a Black woman motivates them to confront certain issues and sort of motivates how they navigate politics. In contrast,
Oh, sorry.
in contrast with Black Republicans, what we found with the Black men was this post from Leon Benjamin was pretty standard. It's a lot of taking pride in this tokenism of we're the proud Black Republicans, we're the few, we're the mighty, versus Black female Republicans, they were a little more strategic of playing up their Republicanism, but also sort of, trying to draw appeal to, hey, like, feel bad to an extent here. I'm being targeted as a Black Republican woman. You're saying I'm wrong. And they're like kind of like trying to employ sympathy at times. And then we see a similar thing once again of Black Democrat women and Black Republican men were the ones talking about racial issues the most here. But next slide. You'll see again, they're talking about the issues differently. Black Democrat men, they more often, they resemble Black Democrat women in the ways they brought up racial issues, and they're very explicit around the racial undertones of issues and how they need to be addressed. Next slide. In contrast, Black Republican men in particular, they employed a lot of what we now hear is the leave the Democratic plantation, they don't care for you, and they're very combative and just problematic at times in their posts. Black Republican women, they at times were critical of the Democrats as well, but they were much more strategic and they weren't making these outright attacks at times. And we found similar trends when looking at gender issues. The thing with the gender issues was the fact that outside of Black Democrat women, they really didn't come up in our sample, which is something to think about moving forward as we're thinking about potential ways to advance our keyword search and make it better, but also the fact that as we're just looking through them, it just wasn't a lot there outside of the Black Democrat women. The other important thing was with the Black Republican women, they were more strategic again in what they said there. The Black Republican men, they were more of the cannon fodder. Reading through a lot of their posts, I read a lot of this odd problematic things that you wouldn't expect a candidate to post on social media, but Black Republican men were doing a lot of that. And we kind of just like scrap that from analysis here, but that's something to talk about in itself as well, of kind of how Black Republican women appear to have this better idea of navigating both being Black and woman, but then also being Republican at the same time, and how they have to appeal to all those groups versus Black Republican men are enjoying more of the spotlight and controversy. So again, Black women candidates, they have to send messages to constituents that accurately convey who they are. And that came across a lot when looking at the Black Republican woman. So the Winsome Sears post of her with the gun isn't at all surprising when we understand that they're downplaying, the ways downplaying their race and gender and playing up the ways they have conservative bona fides. And they're trying to win the game, and Black Republican men don't appear to be doing the same at times. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And we have ended a minute early. Oh, all right. So next up is Elizabeth. You have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. And my name is Dr. Elizabeth Walker. And this is about the Divine Nine political prowess, power, and influence in the election of Vice President Kamala Harris. I have all the founding years on the other side, which becomes important to my research. But this qualitative study is evaluating, Kamala Harris is not the first person who has ran for office who is a member of one of the sororities and fraternities, the historically Black fraternities and sororities. However, she is one who made the decision to stipulate her membership, particularly of Alpha Chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which is at Howard University. And so this project is to utilizes political mobilization theory in order to see how this and also looking at news coverage in order to see how this organization led to more political engagement amongst the Divine Nine. So 1 out of every 20 Blacks are a member of one of the Black letter organizations. And so when we're looking at this relevant literature, I wanted to first look at when did the Divine Nine become more started to gain a higher level of interest amongst the mainstream media. And so the first was, in more recent time, was Loretta Lynch, and during her nomination in 2015, and she was going to be the first U.S. Attorney General and first Black U.S. Attorney General. And it was the members of Delta Sigma Theta that not only came to the confirmation hearing, but they also came to on the floor, and they had press conferences to encourage and push Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell into hosting and to moving her nomination along, to which it led to him becoming more aware of this block of Black women in the modern political landscape and this Black sisterhood that would actually and did actually show up and request action. Public donations have been a really good indicator of political mobilization. And when combine that with social networks that have been utilized on the internet, that has the internet has really been able to increase political mobilization because those social networks are able to gel even faster online. And then looking at how internet and especially focusing on Twitter has been able to garner more new and repeat donors. So in the Divine Nine, there's over 1.7 members currently throughout the world, along with 6,500 chapters. And this is just a picture of AKAs that are in the state capitol in Tallahassee, Florida. And these are just Florida chapters. Most of them are not members of the state legislature, but it is 18 out of the current Black women in Congress. 13 of them are members of one of the members of the Divine Nine. And so I'm looking at the political mobilization theory to examine how looking specifically the excitement that was garnered, and I'm utilizing of the donors of between 1906, 1908, 1911, 1913, 1914, 1920, 1922, 1968. And I'm evaluate the Federal Election Commission to see when those increments have been donated because they correspond to the founding year. And I selected the time period of August 12th to November 7th because that is the period between when she was selected and announced versus the election day. I've also evaluated just to see the amount of interest that was garnered around the Divine by looking at the number of articles that have been published with Kamala Harris and Alpha Kappa Alpha in August 8th of 2021. So as I was tracking donations, there was a frequency of the headlines that I looked at in the tracking donations of the corresponding years. The analysis, Clayton Cox stated, who was over the DNC, and he stated that every 15 minutes that he was receiving $19.08, that totaled 11,000 of these donations. However, when I looked at the FEC records, there was a total of 149 donors, actually. And the donors did give multiple times. And so we look at 124, and you look at the denominations at the moment. The one thing that is important to denote is 1911. I am not sure if that is Omega Psi Phi or Kappa Alpha Psi, being that they were founded in the same year. But it is important to denote that 3 of the organizations, 3 out of the 9 did not. There were no donations that denoted their founding year. Okay, so then we're looking at these are just a sample of some of the news headlines that came out, and there is a difference between those that were catering towards that has more of a Black readership audience. They tend to have a different type of language, such as number 5, ski wee y'all, ski wee see y'all. That was a Black publication versus those that were non-Black publications. Like Political, which was the first one, which was Kamala Harris's Hidden Army discussion. Okay, so political organizations do not endorse candidates. Thank you. Okay, so there's the lower denotations of the lower amount of donations can be contributed to the fact that Divine Nine organizations do not endorse candidates. So they did not give an actual statement to say that they needed to donate. And so the donations really came from word of mouth and social media that garnered people to give those donations of those amounts. Now, Kamala Harris, while she's been in office, she did not do all of this, the Divine Nine, but these are most of them. She has expressed visible support for the Divine Nine, but there needs to be another political measure. There needs to be another measure for their political influence. So the implication here is that they do have a built-in network with excitement. So the question comes moving forward as you're thinking about this is, will more politicians begin to use these organizations, and how will these organizations begin to start utilizing their power? Future ideas is there are some anecdotal aspects. There's pictures of different and there's been more events that have been taking place. There are some anecdotal notions that these organizations were more mobilized. However, there needs to be another way to actually be able to tap into how they were. So you can look at mobilization as voter registration drives. Did it increase? There were more organized town halls. What did that? Were there a greater number of those? There could be a survey and beginning to start reaching out to different people of different members of the Divine Nine and saying, what did they do during the 2020 presidential election? There were social media networks that there were different groups that became more evident, specifically of Divine Nine supporting Kamala Harris. They were unofficial, not attached to a particular organization. Then there interviews can definitely take place where there's more political involvement from the Divine Nine members. And then of course, we can look at, was there an increased membership of the Divine Nine because of all of the public interest? And I can never go without using Nas or a Nas reference. Okay, but by culture, by merit, Alpha Kappa Alpha did have an influence. They were much more excited. Their membership was much more excited than other groups. And we know that Kamala Harris and the national president, which is at the bottom here, she has already visited the White House a number of times. And the question now really asks, what will AKA do with their more visible relationship?
Elizabeth, we're at time.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
I'm sorry, it's always awkward on Zoom. I'm not trying to be rude. So we have 5 minutes left. I'd like to open this up to questions or comments, connections with the panelists. Please do so now. You can go ahead and raise your hand or drop something in the chat, whatever works best. Anyone? We've ended with enough time.
I had a question. For,
okay, thanks, MJ.
Dr. Walker, just you mentioned sort of candidates in the future, potentially going back to that well and kind of drawing on this political activism from like the Divine Nine. But I was kind of thinking about, and maybe it's anecdotal, like some of the reactions, people highlight how it's like they're aware that Kamala, for example, was, playing up the Divine Nine, and it's like not getting the same attention there. And it's almost like they're not going to just blindly support you, and kind of the Divine Nine becoming more sort of conscious themselves of who they give support to as they concern with sort of like not being kind of forgotten, if that makes sense.
Other people have utilized the Divine Nine in the past. It just hasn't been as overt as Kamala Harris. And that may be a concern outside of the organization, but it's particularly with Alpha Kappa Alpha, there seems to have been a benefit within the organization. They've had a definite seat at the table in different ways. So I'm not sure if it's a blind support.
Yeah. Other questions? Well, I'd like to learn a little bit. Here's a question in the chat. The year of the woman in 1992 and 2018 elections. What do you all see for 2022? I know one panelist touched on this, but is there more political movement of Black women being highly politically involved institutionally? And this might start off with Alexis, since you started us with the 1992 as the year of the women.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. Some of the similarities, or the biggest similarity between now and the year of the woman from 1992 has got to be that we see more minority women running for office and winning their elections. So as I said early on in my research, the Center for American Women in Politics predicts a record-breaking number of Black women candidates in particular, and my research focuses on Black women. So I'm not too sure how that translates to other minority women, but I would predict that that's fair in what we see across the board. So I'm thrilled to see that more Black women are running specifically for the Senate, but we see that sort of translating across all levels of government.
Thank you, Alexis. Another question in the chat. What are the reasons for Black male support for Republicans and higher vote for Donald Trump? So I can start off, maybe MJ can follow up. So there is, there's another one that's for us too. There is a uptick of men who responded to these very masculinist call-ins that the Conservative Party, the Republican Party put out there. And that was very evident in the tweets that we saw, right? A posit to say what a real man does or what men should be doing, as opposed to this the effeminate nature of the Democratic Party of seeking handouts. And I think that language appealed to some men, and that's at least what we're seeing in the tweets. And in 1 minute left, we have a question. Do you see Black female Republicans as messaging beyond Black communities? Are they viable candidates for Latinos who have a higher percentage of Republican independent leaders? MJ, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, no, we saw some of that. We saw a few times that, like, that's what we were saying, like these Black Republican women, they're positioning themselves as being ready to actually be elected. And they're not just thinking, if I say Black a lot, or talk about just Black issues, they kind of emphasize, people of color and by POC. One of them, they actually had a few of their posts, written in Spanish to appeal to candidates or to constituents. So it's like, they're really playing the game and trying to, be in there. And again, the Black Republican men are just doing a bunch of a lot.
A lot. And on that note, it is 4:00 Eastern Standard Time. So we have reached the end of our time. Thank you to all of the panelists on the really exciting and interesting papers. And thank you for the participants for showing up and engaging with this work. Hope this will not be our last time together. Happy NCOPS 2022, everyone. Hope to see you in other panels. Bye-bye.